not good. Last but not least, well, it was Plato or Aristotle who said if the philosophers don't become kings, the kings must become philosophers. The same is for managers. I don't expect them to become philosophers. However, I would encourage more dialogue, not during business hours, but in hideaway places for a long weekend, between philosophers and business people, that they talk to each other, that they listen to each other, that they start to understand where do they come from, and then hopefully ask themselves, where should we go? What should we do differently? Thank you.
Yeşile yakın, şimdi galiba duyuluyor. Bende kabahat yok, teknik konular. Thank you very much. We had the opportunity to listen to the three important philosophers dealing many interesting part of the peaceful relations in 21st century. We had, I think, we could have some questions to ask them. If you have questions, we can have 15 minutes to ask questions and to get the answers. If you have questions, you can then present yourself and ask the question to each of these distinguished philosophers. Perhaps I, as a beginner, and perhaps I can start this round by asking to Professor Scarantino if I can know, or in taking into consideration his very well prepared paper, how then, Professor, you can present an ideal philosopher of 21st century dealing with peace? Is it possible to give a definition for an ideal philosopher of our time? I'm closing myself.
You do not expect me to give a definition of ideal philosopher in front of philosophers. I hope. Certainly not. What I could say that I try to teach my students or encourage my students on doing is consider philosophy as something that has been present in the history of the world, in different civilizations. Do not make the mistake of thinking that if it's not Western, it's not philosophy, and try to borrow or learn conceptual tools, ideas from a plurality of traditions. This will open their mind. And I think that's the first step toward an ideal philosopher. I wouldn't take a second because I think I would be in trouble. But I think this is really a key element. Philosophy is not necessarily always on the side of peace. Philosophers have loved war and dictatorships in the past, from time to time. So it's not naturally immune. But I think that what philosophy really can do is open up the mind of people and think that let's think in a plural way. Let's not just focus on us and them. Just kind of blur this distance by learning a plurality of tradition. And I don't know, it might, if you say it like this, it might sound natural, but it's not natural at all. There is a lot of resistance, and there is a lot of resistance, including among some young people, even if less and less.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions? Please, sir. May I please ask you to present yourself?
I am participating from Istanbul, and I'm here from the Virtuous Citizenry Movement Society. I'm the chairperson, and my question is Dr. Klaus Leitzinger, Entschuldigung. When you present the Millennium Goals, that was also taking my attention for a long time. All of them, they are need-based. Almost there is no goal on value-based. Without having ethical values, human rights values, human values, those physical objectives, goals, how much we can improve without having the value carpet under this approach. Thank you very much.
Very good question. There is a management school that says that is called value management, and you have, categories of values that should be reflected by the management. My experience is only very few managers have this ethical musicality. Most of the managers who all work a lot are keen not to violate law and regulation, are keen to make as much profit or a little more as the capital market expects, and that's about it. And for a lot of other value-laden questions like fairness, like prices, pharmaceutical prices are such an example. If a Porsche is too expensive for poor people, we could say, well, it's a Porsche and maybe a bicycle would be fine. But if it is a life-saving medicine, you are dealing with a different dimension. And if you take this up, I find that somehow, and this is why I brought up the issue of what is a fair societal division of labor, I have the feeling they look elsewhere for that. And yes, we know maybe we need enlightened coalitions, maybe we need tax incentives or patent amendments or whatever it is. But, and I have the feeling, I'm doing this kind of work since many years, there is a certain value fatigue. There is a certain responsibility and ethics fatigue. And people say, yes, we have all that, and we have all that, and it's the first who jump on, but now it's different, and now we have different problems with the Ukraine war, with the energy impact, and then we can go back to a reduced business model. I can only tell you, every one of us has purchasing power, every one of us has voting power, every one of us can allocate savings in shares or not. And if we would allocate purchasing power, voting power, allocation power, according to our own values, we could influence the market and then hopefully give an incentive to management to be more ethics conscious or value musicality driven.
Benim bir sorum var. I have a question.
Buyurun hocam.
I have a question to all three speakers. We received from a court a letter asking us what someone that studied philosophy, which jobs can do. What do you think? I have to answer such a question for the court, for a court. What do you think? All three speakers. Thank you. Tekrar mı edeyim? I repeat my question. Shall I repeat my question?
Okay.
What jobs can someone that studies philosophy can do? This is a question addressed by a court to our society. What do you think?
You mean people beginning philosophy now?
Pardon?
Is that what you mean?
Someone that
Yeah,
studies
yeah.
philosophy.
Well,
the question is like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to start off with, I mean, one thing that most people do when they get into philosophy as professionals, at least members of the Turkish Philosophical Society or the American Philosophical Society or whatever, is, you know, they do graduate work, do a PhD and so forth. What they need to do, I think, what I'd like to see more do, is to take more seriously, to perhaps take less seriously these sort of questions of language, differences of language, and you know, sort of relatively trivial issues compared to the issues that we face in the world today that everyone has talked about. In other words, try even as graduate students, and then certainly in one's career, to make philosophy as a whole more serious. I think that's to realize philosophy's responsibility as a profession to work towards world peace and towards dealing with problems of climate change and so forth. And I think a lot of younger philosophers are doing that. I think that is a trend, and that's what I think they should do.
My advice to students is, if you want to go sooner or later to private sector and work in the economic sector, do not study philosophy alone. Look that you have at least a second leg to stand on, be it in economics, be it MBA or whatever it is, because as important as the discipline of philosophy is, the private sector might not be the right place to look for, as regrettable as it is. And those who go to universities or go to consultancy learn as much pragmatism as possible. Don't stay abstract, don't stay, you know, I know people who can quote Aristoteles in Greek, but a manager would not know what the message is. So, you know, if you want to have an impact on business, the approach that I have been taking is when, you know, Plato or Aristoteles or Augustinus said this and this, what would that mean today? What's the abstract relevance of this, and what can we learn from that? And then bring examples as near to the constituency you are advising. Hopefully they understand it.
Thank you. And I'd like to say, I would like to say the contrary of what Klaus just said. It's true that to go into the private, you probably need a second degree, like an MBA or something like that. But that's why I'm saying the contrary. But if you have a degree in philosophy, it works better. The former CEO of Fiat, Marchionne, who died a few years ago, the guy who was essentially put Fiat in place and sold it to General Motors, and bought Chrysler. He had a degree in philosophy, and he said, Had I not had that degree, I would probably still be a manager, but a totally different one, and probably not as good as I was. So that's exactly what Klaus said. The two things together may be a big booster. And philosophy is more and more, for my experience, more and more looked after by the private company, not because of their competences, but because of their skills. And then you may give them an MBA, you give them a special training, and they're very good. But with two remarks. The first is that it depends very much on the country, on the place. It's not consistent all over the world, and sometimes not even in the city. It's much more likely for someone who lives in a big capital and studies in a big capital to find job opportunities in the private sector than someone who graduates from a province university, because oftentimes it's like that, and this is also true in changing depending on the countries. The second remark, this we may have a slight disagreement with. My feeling is that the value of philosophical degree is not about the specific knowledge, but is about the mindset and the intellectual skills that it creates. We have a lot of discussion about this in our universities. I'm always against students introducing subjects like philosophy of business, because this is not what business people want. They know how to do business. They want people who know how to reason in an open way, in a innovative way, who know how to think in a complex way. So, to some extent, it's like mathematics. Pure philosophy may be more effective, logical history, than just a focus thing. There was a wonderful statistics that I read once. Maybe Bill is more familiar than me. I think the 70% of PhD graduate from Princeton in philosophy, who major philosophy as a PhD discipline, about 70% went to work in the private business, insurance, private companies. Not because they didn't find a job in academia, but because the private sectors were really desperately looking for these people who were extremely highly trained and smart and open to different, and even if they didn't know anything about pharmaceutics or any other discipline, 6 months they learn everything. When I graduated in Milan in the 90s, just before we met, I was called by Ciba-Geigy, and because they really called me at home and say, we saw your file, we would like to hire you or come here to consider you for hiring. So this is something that already at that time companies, I didn't accept, probably by mistake, but something that company used to do. So the big question, is philosophy helpful to go work in the private sector? My answer is, it depends on the places, but in a growing number of places, yes, provided it's done in a certain way, provided it's the first step towards a second degree, and probably provided universities take steps with the private sector to start merging this thing. The PhD program we have in gender studies, this is what we do. More than 60% of the positions are negotiated and are funded by the private sector because they want to identify profiles that will eventually be hired by them. And 40% is kind of free, goes mainly into research. Sorry, last remark, like everything, people who start studying today, so people in their early 20s or late teen years, think global. You don't expect to find a job in anything in the place where we were born. And that's a big, then you can go around, then you can come back, whatever. But the market must be, even the academic market, must be seen globally. We always say we have 10 PhD students in ancient philosophy. They will not be able to find an academic job in their country because the number of people who get PhDs is higher than the number of positions. But if they go global, things change completely. They will be able to find a job. And that's something that I think young people today are kind of native in this global approach, but it's something that should be emphasized.
Bazı dinleme problemleri oluyor. Ben mesela akustik problem var galiba biraz. Onu da belki dikkatimize sunabilirim. Çünkü takip etmek zor oluyor konuşmaları. Okay. Is there any other questions? We will then close this session. Please, the last question. Oh, I will suggest you to make a resume, s'il vous plaît. Please.
That's a lesson. Never say it in advance if you have a long question.
I think philosophy is not nice. I think philosophy is asking a question, not necessarily answering one. And first of all, thank you to Professor Kuchuradi and to all of our four professors here. Professor Oba asked the question, is it possible to define an ideal philosopher in 21st century? And Professor McBride gave examples from different time frames, from ancient philosophers and from modern ones. What is peace? What is war? Are those states of being? And I wonder how we can place war and peace in a human being. Do we have both? Since in ancient Greek, there was the concept of cosmos, namely order, and chaos, namely disorder. And in ancient Greece, they used to think that cosmos and chaos, they were together. They were completing each other in a way. Professor Scarantino mentioned that scholars, they bridge, they function as bridges in this world of separation. And I firmly believe that in 21st century, we do need philosophers and also people who are bridges and who function as bridges, because we are in a very much separatist world. And lastly, Professor Leisinger mentioned the importance of honesty, and the IMF example, especially the difference between Germany and Nigeria, it was really striking for me. And it reminded me of the second General Secretary of UN, who famously shared that we had founded the UN not necessarily to create peace, to create paradise in this world, but to avoid hell in this world. So I suppose my big question is, granted that, for example, there's a contemporary artist, Marina Abramovic. She has this famous art piece where she stands still in a room and every single person is able to do anything to her. At first, the first moments, the first minutes, everybody is really polite and caresses her hair and behaves really properly and nicely. But by the end of the 6th hour, people start attacking her with knives and with pens and so on and so forth. So it makes me wonder, of course, it's important to think peace as a state and as an internal quality of humankind, but is it possible, and if it is possible, how can we finally achieve a proper, ideal peace in 21st century, and if possible, ad infinitum? Thank you.
Professor McBride.
You know, I mean, there are a lot of presuppositions in your question, and I can't speak to all of them. But basically, you talked about the human being and the possibility of the tendency, at least in this case that you talked about, of descending into violence and so forth. Yes, I mean, what I'm proposing is it's not going to happen in the next decade or the next century even completely, but I'm proposing that human beings, we as a race, as a species, begin to reconsider what it is to be human. That question that Luca was talking about before, and that when we do that, we work hard as a world, as a global community, to divest ourselves of as much as possible, and of course it won't be quick, of the warlike tendencies, which, as I began by saying, have been taken for granted by most Western philosophers over the centuries, and that's what we need to work on. That's all I'm saying. It's not going to happen overnight.
We will close the session. Is there another reply? Yes.
One simple sentence. Peace starts within human beings. If those that I know who are happy, who are content, who can, who have the feeling they are doing right and they are in the right environment, they are totally different than those who suffer from traumata or for incompetence of living with the situation they have.
Thank you. Is that something from you?
No, I think a diplomat would be much more effective than a second philosopher.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, it was a wonderful session. We were very pleased to listen to distinguished scholars dealing with very important topics, peace and the understanding among the human beings. We had also very nice questions. I would like to thank again for all the speakers for their wonderful contribution to today's philosophical activity that we have in this gathering. Thank you. Tamam. Tamam, merci. This will be a great honor and pleasure for me to distribute the participation documents.
This is for Mr. McBride.
Mr. McBride. This is for you and souvenir. A souvenir from your visit to our society.
Thank you very much.
Tarantino, this is for you.
Thank you.
This is for you.
And this is for you.
Wonderful. And this is for you again.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Lissinger.
Leisinger, Professor Leisinger, this is for you. This is the group souvenir.
And
That one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
ederiz.